do it, twice a day, probably a third of the time, once a day, probably a third of the time, and not at all.
For 20 minutes, twice a day.
Yeah.
So you spend 40 minutes a day as part of your...
Oh, it's such a great investment. I would say that more than any other factor having any effect on my success, it's been meditation. Because the equanimity and also the creativity, because it opens between literally the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, it opens the two sides of the brains and it allows a spontaneity, a creativity, an open-mindedness. And so it's good for not only the health, because you get stress is a terrible thing, but it also is very good in terms of the clarity and you don't get the emotional hijacking, and it's great for creativity. So it's helped me a lot. It's the biggest gift I can give anyone.